Brief History of USA in Revolutionary Period, 1754 to 1793.
In May 1754, the sparks of a global conflict were ignited when Lieutenant Colonel Washington led an ambush against French forces at Jumonville Glen. Weeks later, Washington was forced to surrender at Fort Necessity, his only such surrender, marking the start of the French and Indian War. At the Battle of the Monongahela in 1755, British forces were overwhelmed. Braddock was mortally wounded, and Washington narrowly escaped while leading the retreat. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 concluded the war, resulting in Great Britain acquiring nearly all French territory in North America east of the Mississippi. To curb frontier violence, the Proclamation of 1763 declared Western lands off-limits, infuriating colonists eager for expansion. Parliament passed the Stamp Act in 1765, the first direct tax on the colonies, sparking widespread resistance and the formation of the Sons of Liberty. On March 5, 1770, tensions erupted in the Boston Massacre, where 5 men were killed, providing a rallying cry for the Patriot movement. In June 1772, the overzealous customs enforcer, William Duddingston, ran his ship aground while chasing the packet boat Hannah. 55 men, led by John Brown and Abraham Whipple, rowed out from Providence, captured the crew, and burned the ship to the waterline. Following the Gaspee affair, Samuel Adams warned that British plans to try the suspects in England violated the fundamental right to a jury of one's peers. In December 1773, the Sons of Liberty destroyed 342 crates of tea to protest the Tea Act, an event that became known as the Boston Tea Party. In the spring of 1774, Henry galvanized the colonies with his cry, "Give me liberty or give me death," as the movement toward open rebellion accelerated. A signal from the Old North Church sent Paul Revere and William Dawes on their midnight ride to warn that British regulars were marching on Lexington and Concord. On April 19, 1775, the shot heard round the world was fired at Lexington, ending attempts at a diplomatic resolution and starting a shooting war. At the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775, the Patriots stood their ground until they ran out of ammunition, proving they were not intimidated by British veterans. George Washington assumed leadership of the newly formed Continental Army on July 3, 1775, facing the monumental task of organizing the war effort. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published his bestseller, arguing that it was time for the colonies to embrace total independence from monarchy. Abigail Adams implored her husband to remember the ladies as the founders architected the new society, warning that women would not be bound by laws in which they had no voice. In June 1776, a committee was selected to draft a formal Declaration of Independence, primarily authored by Jefferson, to explain the reasons for separation. On July 4, 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration, proclaiming it self-evident that all men possess unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Battered American troops retreating across a bridge, leaving Brooklyn and New York City in flames. On Christmas night 1776, Washington led a bold crossing of the icy Delaware River to launch a surprise attack on Hessian forces. The victory at the Battle of Trenton and the capture of 900 enemy soldiers restored sagging Patriot morale and revived hopes that the war was winnable. The Battle of Saratoga in October 1777 was the first major defeat of the British and became the turning point that convinced France to join the war. During the horrific winter of 1777-1778, the army faced starvation and disease, but they emerged as a disciplined force under the drilling of Baron von Steuben. Franklin negotiated a formal treaty of alliance with France in February 1778, securing critical financial and military aid for the United States. Heroine Mary Patton manufactured and supplied over 500 pounds of gunpowder to the Over Mountain Men for their march to fight at Kings Mountain. The war became global as Hyder Ali of Mysore attacked the British in India, utilizing rockets that devastated British units. Tai, who escaped slavery, became a respected loyalist commander whose Black Brigade conducted ruthless raids and freed many enslaved people. Brodie served as an aide-de-camp at the Battle of Kings Mountain, demonstrating exceptional bravery under fire as one of 5 black men in the battle. In 1780, the British captured Charleston and an entire American army of over 5,000 men, a major blow to the Southern Patriot cause. As a Cherokee diplomat, Nanyehi negotiated peace treaties, though her efforts to ensure coexistence were often undermined by white settlers' encroachment. In late 1781, a joint Franco-American force trapped Lord Cornwallis on the Yorktown Peninsula, cutting off all lines of escape. Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown on October 19, 1781, effectively ended major military operations in North America. Signed on September 3, 1783, the treaty recognized the United States as free, sovereign, and independent, granting it expansive boundaries to the Mississippi. On December 23, 1783, Washington performed the rare act of voluntarily resigning his power, returning to his life as a private citizen at Mount Vernon. Following the war, thousands of people of African descent who had aided the British were evacuated, their names recorded in the Book of Negroes. The new states operated under the Articles of Confederation, which created a league of friendship so weak it lacked the power to tax or enforce federal laws. Post-war inflation and war debts left the nation in an economic crisis, with a central government unable to manage the collapsing financial system. Frustrated by unpaid wages, officers at the Newburgh encampment considered mutiny, a threat Washington averted with a stirring emotional appeal. In 1786, Daniel Shays led an armed uprising of Massachusetts farmers protesting heavy taxes and the foreclosure of their homes. Many Revolutionary veterans were imprisoned for debts incurred while they were away fighting for the nation's independence. Without a strong central authority, states fought one another over trade and borders, leading to a state of internal discord. As early as 1780, Hamilton warned that the Confederation was fundamentally flawed and would eventually lead to the nation's ruin. Before the 1787 convention, Madison identified 12 key flaws in the Articles, including a lack of enforcement power and judicial authority. The failure of the Annapolis Convention to achieve a quorum led to a call for a broader meeting in Philadelphia to revise the failing Articles. Shays' rebellion served as a final wake-up call, proving to many that the American experiment required a stronger central government to survive. In 1787, delegates from 12 states converged on Philadelphia to decide the future of their fledgling Confederacy. The architects of the new government met in secret, eventually deciding to scrap the Articles entirely and create a new framework. Madison proposed a plan where representation in a bicameral legislature would be based on population, favoring large states like Virginia. Smaller states countered with a plan to maintain the one vote per state system, fearing they would be ruled by the larger ones. The Connecticut Compromise solved the stalemate by creating a House based on population and a Senate where each state had equal representation. Morris and other Northerners criticized the inclusion of enslaved people in representation, arguing it would encourage the iniquitous slave trade. The 3/5 compromise settled the dispute by counting 3 out of every 5 enslaved persons for both taxation and representation. The framers built a system of checks and balances to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful, like the British monarchy they had escaped. On September 17, 1787, 39 delegates signed the 4-page document, launching a fierce national debate over its ratification. Hamilton, Madison, and Jay wrote the Federalist Papers to convince the public that the new government was essential for national survival. Brutus argued that the Necessary and Proper Clause and the Supremacy Clause would grant the federal government absolute and uncontrollable power. On April 30th, 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the first president, knowing his every decision would set a precedent for the future. The Judiciary Act of 1789 fleshed out the brief judicial guidelines of the Constitution, establishing the federal court system and the first U.S. Marshals. In 1790, marshals overcame immense hardships to conduct the first national census, counting nearly 4 million people in the young nation. Washington's cabinet became a battleground of ideas between Hamilton's vision of an urban, expansive economy and Jefferson's agrarian idyll. Hamilton proposed that the federal government assume the state's debts to shore up the nation's creditworthiness, a plan that outraged debt-free southern states. In the Compromise of 1790, Madison and Jefferson agreed to support the debt plan in exchange for moving the national capital to the Potomac River. Hamilton championed the creation of a national bank to stimulate the economy, despite Jefferson's warnings that it was unconstitutional. The Coinage Act of 1792 established the U.S. Mint, though the public initially disliked the frightened expression on Liberty's face. Reluctantly leaving New England in 1792 to repay his school debts, Whitney had no idea he was about to alter the course of American history. Planters were desperate for a way to make short staple cotton profitable, as it took an entire day for a worker to separate only 1 pound of fiber. Inspired by the sight of feathers passing through wire where the bird could not, Whitney designed a cotton gin to filter out the sticky seeds. Patented in 1794, the gin could produce 50 pounds of cotton a day, 10 times what an enslaved person could do by hand. The cotton gin transformed the economy, but backfired spectacularly by making slavery far more profitable and regimented than ever before. To pay for the war debts, Hamilton's whiskey tax of 1791 imposed a burden on frontier farmers who distilled their surplus grain to use as currency. Native nations in the Northwest Territory refused to recognize American claims to their lands, launching raids to defend their autonomy. In 1791, St. Clair's defeat became the worst loss ever inflicted on the U.S. Army by a native force, with hundreds killed in a single morning. "Oh God! Oh God! He is worse than a murderer!" Washington raged, immediately demanding St. Clair's resignation from military command. As the French Revolution took a darker turn in 1793, Americans became divided over whether to support their old allies' bloody transformation. The execution of the French king and the outbreak of war between France and Britain created a political earthquake on American shores. To prevent the weak nation from being embroiled in a European war, Washington issued the Proclamation of Neutrality in April 1793. The new French envoy, Edmond Genet, brazenly tried to recruit Americans for the war, threatening to appeal to the people over Washington's head. When negotiations failed, Washington personally led a massive force into Pennsylvania to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, asserting federal authority. Tasked with rebuilding the army, Major General Wayne meticulously trained his troops for a final advance into native-held territory. In August 1794, Wayne won a decisive victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, finally breaking the Confederacy's resolve to fight. The resulting 1795 treaty relinquished 2/3 of present-day Ohio to the United States, securing a temporary peace in the Northwest. Retiring to Mount Vernon, Washington warned the nation against permanent foreign alliances and the baneful effects of party spirit, defining the Republic's future path.